Nathaniel. Well, first of all, congratulations with Roads of Fire. You're
Thank
this other perspective of the crisis of immigration from another side of the world that we usually don't get to hear about.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's exciting to be able to talk about this.
So tell me about how you came about on wanting to document this. You filmed it, you were there, and you give us little updates of as the film progresses. But first, how did you first hear about it, and how did you find your subjects?
Yeah, well, it started very much New York focused. I'm based here in New York, and at the time, this is 2022, the city was experiencing what it was calling its first wave of the migrant crisis. We had lines around the block in front of soup kitchens and NGOs and asylum seeker support centers. People were kind of everywhere. And the administration here was really stretched to a breaking point. They had no idea how to handle this influx of people. There didn't seem to be a system that was implementable to help support people. So my initial instinct was to just document. I connected initially with an NGO that I got acquainted with through, a friend of a friend in the humanitarian support world. And I just started shooting, and that was the soup kitchen and asylum seeker support center called Evie Loves NYC. East Village Loves New York City. They're still operational, and they do thousands of meals a day for asylum seekers. I started shooting with them, and through them, I became aware of this very interconnected small community of NGOs that all support one another and, more importantly, support asylum seekers and migrants. And so then I pivoted to documenting this community of NGOs. And then through that process, I started to meet migrants. I started to meet asylum seekers, immigrants, refugees. And that culminated in me meeting Maria, who is the primary focus of at least the New York side of the film. Her stories about her asylum journey from her first few weeks here in the city through the entire process. And so I was very fortunate to connect with her, and I shot with her for about 2.5 years.
I was shocked, and I felt like Maria was very lucky with getting asylum legally because I feel like, I mean, they kept talking about proof of what she was talking about that happened, in Ecuador,
Yeah,
domestic
that
violence.
was that was completely crazy to me. When I set out to make a film of this sort, I have to walk in with a knowledge and an understanding of what my blind spots are and where my own points of ignorance are. And by the time she was in the phase of her journey where she had to sort of defend herself in a court in an asylum court, I was fairly, relatively as a civilian knowledgeable about the asylum process, but I had no idea that at that stage in the asylum process, the state essentially treats you, the asylum seeker, like you're suing the state. So the state then takes it upon itself to character assassinate you, the migrant, who are, tasked with creating an evidentiary chain as to why, what were the circumstances that caused you to flee? What, on a very precise level, were the day-to-day thought processes and events that created the context? And, they scrutinize every step of your journey on such a granular level. And that journey was 2 years ago for her at that point. So I had no idea that that was the process. And it was astounding to witness, her going from, I made it through here. I was paroled in. I'm talking to NGOs. I'm talking to lawyers. I have kids who are now enrolled in school. We're beginning our life here. And suddenly I have to retcon my entire experience, go back to the events that I fled, an abusive, situation at home, a country whose economy was collapsing and devolving into chaos increasingly at that point, every day. And, it was just completely chaotic.
She's part of the film as she narrates her experience and crossing borders, mainly the one in the forest, which we typically don't hear about people crossing an island. Usually it's crossing the desert.
Hmm.
And then you have us the route starts at Necoclí, Colombia,
Hmm.
right? With this group
Yeah.
of people that are trying to reach the American dream.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. For many people, it's one of the primary highways and pathways to the United States. It's a small peninsula called Necoclí. It's in Colombia. And it's essentially at the border point between Colombia and Panama. And so you get to this peninsula. It's run entirely by the Cartel del Golfo, the Gulf Cartel, and they run these, clandestine smuggling boats across this, this tiny little stretch of the Gulf to the jungle, and then they navigate the pathways into Panama. Once you get into Panama, it's a system of very, very, loosely marked trees with ribbons on them. But you start in Colombia, you cross into Panama, and then you're on your own for about 5 days straight through the raw jungle where there are gangs of various different types. There are roaming paramilitary groups, there are kidnapping groups. And then eventually you encounter an NGO supported camp or a Panamanian army camp, and then they can help put you on buses and things like that. But it's a raw jungle trek in the most dangerous jungle in the world for about 5 days.
I was amazed at all the dangers and everything they put themselves through, even with their kids, risking the entire family's life um, to reach this dream. It's unbelievable what it is that's pushing them, encouraging them to leave. I couldn't help but just wonder and think what's going through their minds. I mean, you have them speak about it, but it's hard to believe.
Yeah. I mean, this is the one of the central theses of the film. It's people, and I think one of our participants, Mike, he puts it really well. You don't put yourself through hell. You don't walk through hell. You don't confront mortal danger just to come to a country to, you know, get a cushy job or find just some stability. You do it because at home you're in mortal danger. And in our country we have a really problematic relationship with economics insofar as we don't have a bandwidth or a tolerance for even trying to, on a very basic, simple level, understand just how violent and just how dangerous economic collapse really looks like and what that really is. But a country like Venezuela that goes through a boom and bust situation with their oil revenue, their economy collapsed, and the outcome of a collapsed economy is people dying of malnutrition in the streets. It's a health service that doesn't accommodate people with any sort of even remote special needs of any kind. So if you have somebody who is born with any sort of physical ailment, they often die. It's a country that has a lot of very, very serious immediate threats and issues. And so when you make the choice to uproot your life, to walk away from your home, your family, and to leave, it's because you are in very real, imminent threat of death. Your kids are on their walk to school. They might be kidnapped and held ransom. Things are really, 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 really bad. And this idea that people are coming here for a free ride or to take advantage of social services or whatever, it's an outrageous claim when you look at what they're going to be forced to go back to. And indeed, this week, many are being forced to go back to.
The timing, as I was watching and everything going on, it's a really sad time. It makes me feel very lucky and privileged. I'm Mexican myself. I my parents brought me when I was 7, and it just makes you think like what life could have been.
Yeah, yeah. My grandfather, he was a refugee as a Jewish Arab Spaniard from Franco's camps. My family's Spanish. We have moved all over the world. My family actually briefly lived in Venezuela, and seeing what seeing what is happening right now with a violent domestic deportation service, the weight of history is very real right now. And seeing what people are going through, seeing what they're doing, and then also witnessing just, you know, Maduro rigs an election very visibly. It's condemned across on a global level. And 4 months later, we have a deportation force sending the people who are fleeing him to begin with back to a collapsed country. It's an incredibly precarious time, I think.
Before I let you go, can we talk a little bit about Jonathan, the
Yes,
smuggler?
yes.
Because I mean, that's part of like where the stories begin.
Hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about finding him and the way he
Sure.
expressed himself? He was just like, you know what? I'm just doing my job. I need to feed my family, everything.
Yeah.
It's on.
Yeah, Jonathan's a really interesting guy. He's incredibly sweet man. I was connected to him through our participant producer. Her name's Ivana. He had helped a connection of hers get across the border, and it took a number of months of conversation and negotiation to really get in there with him. But his primary focus was protecting his family, but he was also, I think that somebody like him is when you live in a world that's completely shadowy and it's a clandestine world, having an opportunity to speak to people and to reveal the complexities of what you do, I think is really attractive. And it was a pleasure to be able to be there to help him, to give him hesitate to say a platform, but to give him a microphone and help him kind of steer a little bit the narrative on who he is and what he does. It's an incredibly complex job. It is smuggling and it is people smuggling and it operates in a very, very hazy moral world. But you have to understand that when you're in those spaces along the border with Venezuela and Colombia and in some of these places, the vast majority of the people that he smuggles are Syrian refugees. They're people who, if they go back, and I met and I spent a lot of time shooting with a number of these folks, if they have family in Syria, they have family in Iran or in various places, and they're there and they're relying on Jonathan truly as a life-saving force because if they go back to Syria, or if the Syrian, then the Assad regime or the Saudi Arabian regime find out who they are, their families will be publicly executed or they will be flogged to death or something like that. So somebody like Jonathan really does provide a life-saving system for them, service for them. So he sees himself, and I think fairly, as a very real humanitarian force in the world. But that being said, he also does need to get paid. And that's where it's the moral complexity of what this economy does is laid out. The migrants are people who every step of their journey they're taken advantage of from across the board from the second they leave their homes. Every government, every checkpoint, every border, every person they encounter is looking to in some way take from them and to exploit them and to treat them as a vehicle for their own personal enrichment or for their own government's enrichment. And somebody like Jonathan, while he sort of views himself as a Robin Hood of sorts and a humanitarian, which I think he is. I think that he is also, for better or worse, a part of a system that is singularly built upon exploiting people who are as vulnerable as it gets.
Yeah, that's tough. Um, well, thank you so much, Nathaniel, for your time with Roads of Fire. It's going to be premiering on the 11th next week.